All right, we are going to get right into it. End Times Moments 2. But in general, there have now been over 22 or so videos in this comprehensive series. And so, what I want to do is make sure the audio is shared and no long intros or anything like that. We're just going to kind of get right into the short clip that I want to address, and it's going to have to do with the 70 years and also the 70 weeks. I did a video, I think 3 videos ago, refuting Gary DeMar. It was about 2 hours, and I went through various portions of his debate with Kent Hovind on the issue and demonstrated that indeed the Antichrist does make a covenant, and specifically pointed to verses in Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Daniel 12, Daniel 7, and correlated it with Daniel 9 in terms of Daniel 9:27. The he, right? He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice to cease. And so Gary DeMar, challenged non-preterists to show him somewhere in Daniel or just in general where the Antichrist makes a covenant. And so I went to Daniel 8, where in terms of its immediate fulfillment, the shadow fulfillment, it was Antiochus Epiphanes making a league. And demonstrated that in all of these various passages, it was Antiochus Epiphanes or the future Antichrist. And I'm gonna demonstrate why an understanding in terms of these shadow fulfillment and then future more dramatic fulfillments are so important, but also show you right from the scriptures why they are a reality that unfortunately most preterists ignore. And so you have Antiochus Epiphanes in terms of the foreshadowing, but you have these details that apply to the future Antichrist. We can see this in Matthew 24. We can see this especially in Revelation 13, because we have an abomination of desolation in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes and the Grecian rule where he stepped foot into the temple. Right, you can see here Antiochus Epiphanes, 168 BCE, marched to Jerusalem, and he erected an image to Zeus in the temple. Talks about how he offered up a sacrifice. There's some sources that say he offered up a sacrifice, a pig specifically in the temple. First Maccabees 10-11. I mean, this is the Apocrypha, so we want to take it with a grain of salt, right? It's not canon, it's not inspired scripture, but there's some interesting history in there, and all of it is not necessarily reliable. But even in First Maccabees 10-11 specifically, we see Antiochus Epiphanes, and then we also see in verse 11, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant. We also know that the word league, if you were to, I'm going to go to the specific slide on it, the word league literally means covenant. And so in my Daniel section here, there we go. Daniel 11, he shall take away the daily sacrifice. And right here, covenant. Covenant is essentially a deal or an agreement made with somebody. What is a league? It's a covenant. Dictionary.com. Notice verse 23, and after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. And so that's the whole point of a type or a shadow, where you have events in Daniel 8 and Daniel 11. You have localized fulfillments. Just like we see in Matthew 24, localized shadow fulfillments. with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and that 7-year Jewish Roman War. But that's the whole point of a shadow fulfillment, is that in the future you have a fulfillment, but in its entirety, in its fullness, where it's no longer a localized event or a localized fulfillment or even a partial fulfillment. It is the fulfillment of prophecy in its entirety, in its fullness. All will be fulfilled. That's why we see in the end times, in Revelation specifically, we see worldwide tribulation, worldwide war. In 70 AD, it was affected. What was going on was a big deal in that region with Israel, the Jewish nation. But outside of it, India, China, and so on, it wasn't even on their radar. Okay, but anyways, that's not the point of this video. I just wanted to kind of give a recap. It was 2 hours long, and I touched on a lot. And so this one's going to be shorter and essentially touch on just one single point that Dr. Gary DeMar makes in this video. And then I want to address it thoroughly. And it's going to have to do with the 7 years and the 70 weeks and the parallel that we see there. So here we go. I'm going to play the clip, and then I'm going to give my comments.
To the 70 weeks of years thing and the gap, because that's an extremely important part of the prophecy. How does Daniel 9 begin? Do you remember what happens at the beginning of Daniel 9? Daniel is reading what we would call today the book of Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11, it states how long the captivity is. Why is Daniel in captivity? Because of a violation all the way back to the Levitical laws, and they're going to put the land of Israel to rest for 70 years. And so they're going to be deported. They're the northern tribes first, and then finally the southern tribes, and they're going to be deported. They're going to be in captivity for 70 years. Here's the question. What if God, at the end of the 69th year, without telling the Jews, that he just decided, well, there's just going to be a gap there. We're just going to put a gap between the 69th and 70th year. And so the people of Israel just waiting that the 70th year is going to come. And it came, and it's still in captivity. And then they thought, well, maybe we miscalculate. So they wait another year and another year and another year. So they finally get one of the prophets, and says to the prophet, communicate with God and see why we're still here. Oh, don't worry. What I did is I put a parenthesis in there. I put a gap in time. You're still only in captivity for 70 years, but we're not counting the parenthesis. So I believe that the 70 years of captivity is the anchor point for the 70 weeks of years. That it's the same relationship. No gap in the captivity, no gap in the 70 weeks of years. There's nothing in the text that says there's a gap. You have to import that into the text.
Okay, so I briefly touched on this in my first video. Again, it was a 2-hour video. I was touching on more of his points, mainly answering his question, where does the Antichrist make a covenant? And so on this specific issue, as he correlates the 70 years with the 70 weeks, he is right in terms of the relationship or the anchor point. But where he is wrong is in the context. And I write about this specifically in my book, End Times Revealed. And so I want to expand on it specifically, because unfortunately I've noticed that the partial preterists, especially those that hold to the Daniel 9:27 view that it's all been fulfilled, there's no 70th week in the future, I haven't really seen them engage these arguments, at least not in a sophisticated or detailed manner. Okay, so the question I want to ask then is, what is the context of Daniel chapter 9? And, you know, as I go over the context of it, I want to go to, just to give you guys a visual of Daniel and the point in question. So we'll leave it here in terms of a visual. And in the beginning of the chapter of Daniel chapter 9, we are told about the 70 years of Babylonian captivity. And that's not to be confused, of course, with the 70 weeks, the prophecy that's given near the end of Daniel 9. And we know that the return, that the Israelites return at the end of the 7 years. This is prophesied. Daniel understands this from the book of Jeremiah. And after this information about the 70 years, we get the vision that has to do with the 70 weeks. And we find that parallel between the 70 years and the 70 weeks. And so I do want to point out that Gary DeMar is right, that there is a relationship there. But he scoffs at the 70 weeks, even though, and I proved this in the last video, that it's God who breaks up the 70 weeks for us, right? There's 7 weeks, 62 weeks. After the second component, you have 7 plus 62, which is 69. After that second component, so after 69 weeks, although there's a gap between the 7th and 8th week, and then you have once your 8th week begins, you have that 62 weeks. And so at 69 weeks, after the 69 weeks, Messiah is cut off. There's the prophecy of Jesus Christ being cut off, not for himself, but for you, for me, for the world. He died on the cross. He was buried. He rose again. This is an amazing prophecy of his substitutionary atonement, which means animal sacrifices never saved to begin with anyways, but animal sacrifices are no longer needed because Jesus Christ is the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. And that's an amazing fulfilled prophecy. That's an amazing prophecy of Jesus Christ, who came in the future in the sense that when this is written, Jesus Christ was off into the future. And so he's cut off after the 69th week. And so you can't fit his ministry into the 70th week because it's after the 69 weeks, as in after that second component, which means the third element or the third component hasn't even begun yet. Okay, because again, you have 7 weeks, then a gap. Then there's 62 weeks. After that component, Messiah is cut off. And then we have another week, the 70th week. Okay, but anyways, I spent the whole video on that. Again, that's just a short recap. Okay. So Gary DeMar, unfortunately, he's not recognizing the fact that already we do have some differences between the 70 years and the 70 weeks because God is breaking up the 70 weeks. He's not breaking up the 70 years. Okay, but that's not the main point here. The 70 years of Babylonian captivity culminates with what? It culminates with Israel returning to the promised land. So basically the 70 years conclude or end with what? It ends with a happy ending where the children of Israel make it back into the promised land. But the 70 weeks, not to be confused again with the 70 years, ultimately culminates with what? Believers in the promised land for the millennial reign of Christ. The 70 weeks ends with a resurrection of the dead. This resurrection is composed of all saints, all believers of all time, who will literally rule and reign with Jesus Christ for 1,000 years. And that's why we can say the 70 weeks, these things that need to be accomplished in these 70 weeks, okay? Finishing the transgression, making an end to sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. It is the fact that the 70 weeks end with the millennial reign, in the same way that the 70 years culminates with Israel returning to the promised land. We have the shadow fulfillment, but the more literal fulfillment, because yes, Jesus Christ put an end to sins. He brought in everlasting righteousness. If I believe, if I trust in Jesus Christ for salvation, I have everlasting life. My sins, past, present, and future, are forgiven. He's forgiven us of some, no, all trespasses. He will not impute sin. Romans 4. That's future tense. Okay. So the point is that at the death of Jesus Christ, when Messiah was cut off, he died, he was buried, he rose again. We do have the spiritual fulfillment of these things. He put an end to sins. He brought in everlasting righteousness. He made reconciliation for iniquity. He was anointed at his baptism. But here's the thing. It is not until the millennial reign where this is literally fulfilled. He's literally anointed in the same way prophets and priests were in the Old Testament. He's ruling and reigning in our hearts right now. So Christ is ruling and reigning. He is and not yet. In the same way that we as believers are justified, regenerated, we're being sanctified, but we're not yet glorified. So we are saved and yet not saved. Jesus Christ is ruling and reigning and yet not ruling and reigning, because he's ruling and reigning spiritually in our hearts. He's ruling and reigning in heaven. He's seated at the right hand of the Father. But he will literally be ruling and reigning on this earth at the millennial kingdom with all saints in glorified bodies. Remember, the salvation or redemption of our bodies is future. Right now, we sin because of our flesh. And the reason there's going to be no sin in heaven is because flesh and blood doesn't inherit the kingdom of God. We're going to get new bodies, and then there will literally be an end to sin. Because we do still sin right now, but in the future there will be a literally an end to sin, and there will literally be an everlasting kingdom. Okay, and I've done whole shows on that. So, as you can see, since the 70 weeks will end, it must end in order to fulfill all of these things in their entirety. It ends with a resurrection of the dead. And this resurrection is composed of all saints of all time who will rule and reign with Jesus Christ for 1,000 years, when all of spiritual Israel shall be saved. The times of the Gentiles, we understand, I've done an entire program on it, begins at the abomination of desolation, where Antichrist continues in power for 42 months. And the Gentiles come in, the nations come in essentially, and Jerusalem is trodden down by the Gentiles for 42 months. And so until the fullness of the Gentiles come in, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Well, since that's 42 months, the 42 months ends with what? The millennial reign of Jesus Christ, when all of Israel shall be saved, because all that make up spiritual Israel are believers. And so all of spiritual Israel is essentially saved. And therefore, you should probably recognize this beautiful shadow fulfillment, with the 70-year captivity being the shadow fulfillment, where the children of Israel, after the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, literally return to the land. But the 70 weeks being the literal, more dramatic fulfillment, because the 70 weeks ends with a literal kingdom. And this is why the ultimate fulfillment, because I oftentimes talk about the fact that starting in 66 AD, right here, we had the 7-year Jewish-Roman War. And that's why Daniel 9 makes sense when you go here and interpret, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, who destroyed the city and the sanctuary, the temple and the city, in 70 AD? It was Commander Titus and his Roman army. We know this from history. And so once Messiah is cut off in 33 AD, eventually we have the Jewish-Roman War that lasts 7 years to the Preterists. This is all apparently just a big coincidence. And so it's a 7-year war, starts in 66 AD, right in the middle of this 7-year war. The temple is destroyed. The city is destroyed in 70 AD, which literally stopped the sacrifice. Because although they were supposed to stop sacrifices when Jesus rose from the dead, they didn't. But they literally stopped sacrifices when the temple was destroyed. But you can't do sacrifices. You can't perform that ceremony if there's no temple. And so we understand that it was literally Commander Titus and the Roman army that destroyed the city. And so notice this: in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And that is exactly when the temple was destroyed and the sacrifice ceased, literally. And it's an amazing shadow fulfillment in the sense that in Daniel 8, we understand Antiochus Epiphanes did the same thing. He went in, sacrificed a pig, some sources say, but most sources would agree that he set up a statue of Zeus. He claimed to be God manifest. There's coins of him, demonstrating this. And so we've got types of Antichrist, and somebody like Antiochus Epiphanes, what he has done in history. We see in Revelation 13, especially, we see the future Antichrist. Revelation is way after Daniel, of course, way after the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, doing a lot of the same things. Because there's nothing new under the sun. The world works in cycles. Prophecies work in cycles, right? Prophetic cycles. And so we have this amazing shadow fulfillment. And I've even had some people say, oh, no, it wasn't 7 years. Well, I've got many sources here. Notice this. 7-year Jewish-Roman War. The first Jewish-Roman War, 66 to 73. The war didn't end in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. It went on for another 3.5 years. Notice this. First Jewish-Roman War, 66 to 73 AD. Right in the middle of that war, the temple's destroyed. The sacrifice stops. And it's so funny because they'll say, oh, Daniel 9. Now, here's the thing, though. The devil likes to mimic that which Jesus did, right? In the end times, you got this unholy trinity. And the reality is our God is a trinity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, the triune God. And so what you have is the devil who wants to be like the Most High. You have the Antichrist, the false prophet, and the dragon who gives the Antichrist his power. And what's funny about Daniel 8 and Daniel 11, it talks about how Antiochus Epiphanes, he has power, but it's not of his own, because he's being controlled by the dragon in the same way that the Antichrist, or he's being influenced by the dragon. And so, yes, that's why in Daniel 9, where it talks about Messiah shall be cut off, not for himself, but for you, for me, for the sins of the world, for everybody. That right there is telling us that this Messiah will be cut off. And because of his death, because he is being cut off not for himself, but forever. That's the substitutionary atonement, which means he is the one sacrifice. And so once you get into Daniel 9:27, now we're reading about what happens after that. We're reading about the events of 70 AD in terms of its shadow fulfillment. So again, we got the 7-year Jewish-Roman War. And so the Antiochus Epiphanes taking away the sacrifice, Emperor Titus destroying the temple and stopping the sacrifice, although those were demonic sacrifices. Jesus had already died and rose again and rose from the dead at that point. Nonetheless, he's destroying the temple and he's taking away the sacrifice. Just like in the end times, Revelation 13, the great image of the beast is set up, and this time it can talk. It is different than the image of Zeus set up in 2nd century BC with the Grecian leader Antiochus Epiphanes, because again, there's shadows, localized fulfillments, and there are worldwide, dramatic, the literal fulfillments in the future. Endgame, one could say. Emperor Titus in 70 AD. Titus had returned to Rome in 70 AD after he conquered Jerusalem. He was given a triumph or military celebration for his victory, and was considered a great Roman general. Titus was the one who destroyed the Jerusalem and made it fall. And it happened right in 70 AD at the midpoint of this Jewish-Roman war. But again, this was not the complete fulfillment. The more dramatic fulfillment will be in the future, after the 7-year period where everything flows right into the millennial kingdom. Emperor Titus, right here. The siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Titus and his Roman legions breached the city's middle wall. And so notice, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the temple, the sanctuary, the city. And that's exactly what happened. Antiochus Epiphanes, a shadow, erected an image of Zeus. And so let's go back now to Daniel 9 and continue. Okay. And so the reason why what occurred between 66 and 73 was only a shadow fulfillment, and why Daniel 9 can't only be talking about Titus and has to be talking about the future Antichrist, the one described in Revelation 13 specifically, where we have a description of that time of great tribulation with the mark of the beast, the one world religion, those that don't worship this image. The beast gives life under the image. It can talk, because we understand in the future, technology will allow for that. We watch movies all the time. We watch moving images all the time that are alive. You're looking at an image right now with me on the screen. And so technology tells us that's possible. A one world currency with this mark of the beast, this supposed mark that if you don't take, you can't buy or sell, and you'll be killed, especially if you don't worship the beast. Well, a couple thousand years ago or 1,000 years ago, that wouldn't have made sense. How could that be possible? How could you institute such a thing? But today in 2023, we understand how that's possible. And so now these prophecies make a lot more sense to us today. Okay. So again, we have a shadow fulfillment with Titus, the 7-year Jewish-Roman war, and then the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And so this is all an amazing shadow fulfillment. But we know the 70 years ends with what? Restoration of Israel to the promised land in the Babylonian captivity. In 73 AD, what do we get? You have 66 to 73. 70 AD is where the temple is destroyed. What do we get? We basically get the opposite of what we got after the 70 years. But there's supposed to be a relationship. There's an anchor point here. There's a parallel. But here we see no correlation. There is no return to the land. There is, as a matter of fact, a dispersal back out of the land. But when we recognize dual prophecy fulfillments and the more literal and dramatic fulfillment in the end times, this makes perfect sense. Since we have the Antichrist in the final 7 years of history before the millennium, and I'm still baffled that people say there's no 7 years mentioned in the end times. It's like, we have all these numbers. I've done whole videos on this. I've described it in debates. I've got an entire section in my book on the timeline. It hasn't been engaged by the critics. We have 1,260 days, which is correlated with 42 months. That refutes the historicists. They want to say, oh, the 1,260 days actually means years. No, because it's compared to or contrasted with 42 months, 3.5 years, 3.5 years. 1,290 days, which is also 3.5 years. But since it's the second half of a 7-year period, you got to account for the leap month. Add 30 days, since the Bible's calendar goes by 30 days, therefore 360-day years rather than 365-day years. And so to not have winter in July and summer in December, you have to make up for that. So you got 3.5 years there. Then you've got, the 3.5 years in Daniel with times, a time, and half a time. And so we've got 3.5 years, 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years, 1,290 days, which is 3.5 years. We've got 1335. Blessed is he that cometh to the 1335, referring to the rapture, the day we wait for the redemption of our bodies. Notice how that's less than 7 years. All of these equal out 7 years. And you have subsets of that 7 years, because it's talking about events in the second half, talking about events in the first half, talking about, the 1335 that we wait for. And so it's just baffling to me that people can still say that, we don't find a 7-year period described in Revelation. There's so many correlations with Revelation and Daniel. It's flabbergasting. Anybody could say that they don't exist. So anyways, when we recognize dual and triple prophecy fulfillments, because remember, we had an abomination of desolation 2nd century BC with Antiochus Epiphanes. In 70 AD, a type or a partial abomination of desolation because the temple was destroyed. But as far as I know, there's no historical account or records of, Commander Titus setting up an image of any kind. And so it wouldn't make any sense that Jesus here in Matthew 24, where he says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Well, wait a minute. We understand that there was a shadow fulfillment. There was an abomination of desolation with Antiochus Epiphanes, but this was before Jesus. This was before the birth of Jesus. But now we have Jesus Christ in Matthew 24 talking about another abomination of desolation. But I don't believe that this can be Titus. Some would say it's Titus. But again, where did Titus set up an image? Where did Titus make a league? We understand that Antiochus Epiphanes made a league, and since he's a type or a shadow of the Antichrist, since a lot of the things that are described in terms of Antiochus Epiphanes actually apply to the future Antichrist, spoken of and described all throughout Revelation. Remember, there are many Antichrists, but we know that in the last days, Antichrist will come. There's one big Antichrist, but there's been many little Antichrists. And so Antiochus Epiphanes, he thought he was Zeus manifest. He thought he was God manifest. That's an Antichrist. That's somebody that's denying the Lord. The future Antichrist is someone who's going to deny the Messiah, deny the Lord. He's going to claim to be God in the same way that Antiochus Epiphanes claimed to be God. So people, you can't mix, you can't forget that Daniel 8, Daniel 11 are both Antiochus Epiphanes. All of that happened, and it's going to happen again, but it's going to happen again not in terms, it's not going to be as localized. It's going to be worldwide. It's going to be dramatic, more dramatic. Everything will be fulfilled in its entirety. So we have Jesus talking about an abomination of desolation. Then in Revelation 13, we have another abomination of desolation because it speaks of an image that can talk. And if you don't worship that, well, where do you think that image is going to be set up? Well, Revelation 13 is after Matthew 24. 70 AD is where the temple's destroyed. So to have another image erected, except this time, the beast gives life unto it. It can talk. If you don't worship it, you'll be killed. Well, you need another temple then. But that temple's not going to be of God. It's going to be of Satan, just like the images of Satan. And just like any sacrifices that go on in it are going to be of Satan. Just like Revelation 11 talks about how, the holy city, Jerusalem, where Jesus Christ was crucified, spiritually, it's called Sodom in Egypt. Or, 2 Thessalonians, where it talks about the man of sin stepping into the temple, claiming to be God, sitteth in the temple as God, capital G. We know he's not God, but that's what people will call him. That's how people see him. And so that's how it's being described. But it doesn't mean that it's of God. And so again, Antiochus Epiphanes, abomination of desolation. Jesus Christ here is talking about an abomination of desolation, and then we read about in Revelation 13. So that's triple. That's a triple prophecy fulfillment because you have shadows and then you have the end game. And so, this can't be missed. And so again, we know that the Antichrist in the final 7 years of history, he will exist, he will wage war before the millennium. And we know that at the start of the millennium, God's people will be gathered into the land. So remember, the 70 years of Babylonian captivity culminates. It ends with Israel, the children of Israel, returning to the promised land. At the start of the millennium, God's people are gathered into the land. That is, all believers of all time will literally rule and reign with Jesus Christ. So let me repeat that because this is important. And this is where Dr. Gary DeMar goes wrong because he's not recognizing this important relationship. He's recognizing a relationship, but he's not recognizing the important relationship. He's also not recognizing the context of Daniel chapter 9, since the beginning of the chapter starts with the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, where the children of Israel return after the 70 years. We've already, in hours and hours worth of videos and in my books, I've already demonstrated the fulfilled prophecy with the Jewish-Roman War, and nobody's even attempted to engage that. It's basically, that's all a coincidence. Daniel 7, 8, 11, 12, it's Antiochus Epiphanes, a type of Antichrist, and then the Antichrist himself. Daniel 7 has the little horn coming out of a totally different kingdom, the fourth kingdom. And so, and Daniel chapter 8 is talking about the little horn from the third kingdom. So you have two little horns, one from the Grecian Empire, one from technically the Roman Empire, since Jesus Christ came during the Roman Empire, which was the one world ruler at that point, conquered spiritually. But why it's important to recognize that Daniel chapter 7 is talking about a little horn coming out of the fourth kingdom is because the one world order in the end times that is ruling worldwide and not just local, like the Roman Empire at that time ruling the known world, is Jesus Christ will conquer physically, because you have the millennial reign. So you have Rome, which is a type of the final beast, the final kingdom, the one world order that we see. Everything's moving towards that. And so the little horn that comes out of that will be the Antichrist. And that's why the little horn of Daniel 7 is different than the little horn of Daniel 8. The little horn of Daniel 8, since it's coming out of the Grecian kingdom, the third kingdom, that, as we know, is Antiochus Epiphanes. And chapter 11, we're looking at, in terms of the short term, we're looking at Antiochus Epiphanes, but we're also looking at a future one world leader, the Antichrist. Because again, there are immediate fulfillments, and then there are future fulfillments. Or we have a localized event, a localized fulfillment, but in the end times, we have a worldwide event or series of events, and therefore fulfillment. So these things are important to understand, okay? So the first 70 years of Babylonian captivity had the children of Israel outside the land with an eventual return to the land. That's the context. There's a relationship here, but Gary DeMar doesn't see it. The 70 weeks, therefore, requires a gap, and that's why God puts in the gap, because he breaks up the 70 weeks into three elements or three components: 7 weeks, 62 weeks. At the end of those two components, which combined equal 69 weeks, Messiah is cut off, and then we have one more week, which describes the he in Daniel 9:27 confirming the covenant for a week, and in the midst of the week, so on and so forth. Okay, and so God is breaking this period, the weeks, up into these components, and we need to understand those components. We need to interpret it in light of those components, and we understand that there's a gap, an obvious gap, between the first coming and the second coming. 2 Peter 3 talks about in the last days there's going to be scoffers. Where is the promise of his coming? Uniformitarianism, right? You're going to have scoffers denying three things: the creation, the world that then was being overflowed with water, and the coming judgment. They're scoffing because, where is the promise of his coming? Why isn't Jesus Christ returned? Well, Jesus Christ returned in 70 AD, 33 AD to 70 AD. That's not really a long time. People are not going to be saying, where's the promise of his coming? It makes sense if it's 2,000 years. Yes, where is the promise of his coming? We see atheists scoffing about that today, ridiculing the Bible today. But we see all of these events culminating into what Revelation 13 describes as this one world system with a one world central power and a one world leader, with a one world currency, a one world religion. So we understand that all of that needs to take place before his second coming. And so there's a gap between the first coming and the second coming. As a matter of fact, there's a gap between Jesus's resurrection and then the Jewish-Roman War, since the Jewish-Roman War is 66 to 73. And, preterists don't even really talk about that 7-year war. We're right in the middle of it. The temple's destroyed, and therefore the sacrifices stop. They ignore that. They don't see any of that in Daniel 9, 26, and 27. But that's an amazing fulfilled prediction. What they want to say Daniel 9:27 is about is what the previous verse is about, with Messiah that shall come. He'll be cut off, but not for himself, but for the world. That's what we understand as the substitutionary atonement, which takes away the need for animal sacrifices. There's that fulfillment right there. And then afterwards, we get all of this in terms of the shadow, but then we also get the future, more dramatic fulfillment, okay? So the 70 weeks requires a gap, since there is a gap between the first coming and the second coming, and also the millennium. And so the 70 weeks, therefore, ends with all believers of all time, those that make up spiritual Israel, the saved. You have to be saved to inherit the kingdom, or the Israel of God, entering the promised land, where they will rule and reign with Christ. And so we have a perfect two-part picture of restoration. And this is the anchor point. This is the relationship that Dr. Gary DeMar, unfortunately, does not see, acknowledge, or point out. There's a relationship. The beginning of Daniel chapter 9, 70 years of Babylonian captivity. Children of Israel return to the land. Happy ending. End of the 70 weeks requires the gap, since there is a gap between first coming, second coming, millennium. We also get a happy ending, this perfect two-part picture of restoration, because we have the saints inheriting the millennium, inheriting the land. And so now the 70 years and the 70 weeks, since the children of Israel after the 70 years made their way back into the promised land. And now the 70 weeks ends ultimately with what? The resurrection of the dead, where all the saved Israelites over the history of this planet will be resurrected alongside the Christians who are also resurrected because they are saved, they're justified, they're regenerated, they're born again, they're predestined for glorification. And so all believers of all times, literally the saved Israelites of the Old Testament, the saved Israelites of the 12 tribes of Israel, they're going to rule and reign with Jesus Christ. This is the resurrection of the dead. We all rule and reign with Jesus Christ for 1,000 years, with Jesus Christ on the throne of David. So again, the 70 years ended with a shadow of a kingdom. We understand that, but it didn't last. But the 70 weeks ends with an everlasting kingdom, a real kingdom that cannot be corrupted, where Jesus Christ is ruling on the throne of David, and all saints of all time are ruling and reigning with him. Two happy endings, a two-part picture of restoration. Restoration after the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, and restoration after 70 weeks. And so this is the relationship. The 70 years, that wasn't a complete fulfillment. The real dramatic fulfillment will be in the future, after the 7-year period, where everything flows right into what? Flows right into the millennial kingdom. And that's why it's important to understand the context. It's important to understand the relationship. And it's important to understand why God broke the 70 weeks into 3 elements or components. Okay, so here's the next phase of this video. This is bonus. I just wanted to go over, now go over a comments on comments. So I promised you comments on comments. So we'll go through one comment here from Kurt. And it's going to be a fun one. And since it is going to be a lot of fun, I am going to play the Evolution Debate Challenge trailer. I'll be back with a full glass of water, and we're going to have some fun with comments on comments.
But do we have evidence that large-scale changes occur? Yeah, we have the fossil record, and it really is a record, and it's so much so that he can't even pretend to refute it. He just has to pretend it's not really evidence.
For anybody in this room who calls yourself a Christian, if you think you have scientific evidence to indicate you're God, bring it. You ain't got it. I win.
How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?
All we've ever seen in the history of humanity is variations happen with limits. You really think an amoeba turned into a shark and a whale and everything? There's no evidence of a single-celled creature ever producing even a two-celled creature, let alone an elephant or a whale or a human. but they put them on, draw lines on paper. The evolution theory clearly teaches the Earth began as a hot ball of rock. As it cooled down, it began to rain, and it rained on the rocks for millions of years and turned them into soup, and the soup came alive. Wade, simple question. Do you believe you are related to a snail? Just a yes or no.
Yeah.
One more thing. Next time we have a debate, instead of a possum hat, Wade, I got the perfect hat for you to wear. Right here.
Oh, hold on.
With your SpongeBob imagination. Just imagine, you're related to a possum.
I don't have any tinfoil, but I'm sure you've got some tinfoil. You can make a hat.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Everyone's
stuff.
in on it, right?
All right, we are back. Commercial break is over. Any of you evolutionists want to take the debate challenge, the evolution debate challenge, which is now continuing into 2023, please shoot me an email and we're going to set that up right away. So real quick, let's go over this. We got Kurt. We got our boy Kurt. God bless. I always appreciate your comments. And unfortunately, Kurt is, from my understanding, a post-wrather, and so he's not understanding. And it's flabbergasting to me how many people just don't understand the basic fact that your trumpets come after the seals, but since your sixth seal is where the sun and moon go dark and the stars fall from heaven, and we understand there's a sixth seal rapture where the rapture is between the sixth and seventh seals, as per what? Matthew 24, Luke 20, Mark 13. The sun and moon are darkened. Those are the cosmological disturbances that we are to look out for in terms of the rapture, the day of the Lord, the day of Christ. See, a lot of people are confused about the day of the Lord and the day of Christ. It's the same day as the rapture, but the day of the Lord is in the context of the unbelieving world. That's why the Bible oftentimes, when you read about the day of the Lord, it's in reference to judgment, to wrath, to the sun and moon going dark. But with the day of Christ, the context is believers, the day of redemption, the day we wait for, the rapture. Okay, so two different contexts, same day. And so we don't want to think that they happen on different days. The day of the Lord is in the context of the unbelieving world. The day of Christ is in the context of the believing world. It's a day of salvation, the day we wait for. And so he says, Donnie, no, the trumpets, not in parallel to the vials. The trumpets are the tribulation. So he's trying to put the trumpets in the tribulation, and the vials are the wrath. No, the trumpets and the vials are both wrath. We have 1 Thessalonians 3, which talks about how we are appointed unto affliction and tribulation. 1 Thessalonians 5 talks about how we're not appointed unto wrath. Right in between those two chapters, we have what? 1 Thessalonians 4, which is the famous rapture passage. That's why the rapture is post-tribulation, pre-wrath. The trumpets comprise the trumpet judgments, God's wrath, hail and fire cast upon the earth, mountain cast into the sea. These are supernatural events. And we see a relationship between the trumpets and the vials because they are complementary. That's why your first trumpet and your first vial, what do they have to do with? They have to do with earth. Second trumpet, second vial have to do with sea. Third trumpet, third vial has to do with rivers, and so on and so forth. There is a correlation. They are happening concurrently or simultaneously. They're not the same. You can picture, each angel has a trumpet in one hand, a bowl in the other, and they're happening concurrently. They're simultaneous. And I spent a great deal of time on that, specifically in my follow-up book, The Wrath of God. And so let's continue here. The four horses are an overlay to the trumpets. You can see this if you go to Revelation 6. So he posts all of this. And Kurt, unfortunately, I'm going to have to refute your position right now. And I've done full shows on this, as a matter of fact. And I just debated a post-wrather, Jamie Russell. And I might put out a clip because this is not the first time. But anytime I engage a post-wrather in a discussion, a live discussion, they have no choice but to admit that their position is not really consistent with what the scriptures are saying. And I'm going to show you that here right now. Okay, so first we got to go over the chronology. Remember, we have a two-part chronology in Revelation. Revelation 1 to 11, this is easy to prove. Daniel's broken up in the same way. We got Daniel 1 to 6 and then Daniel 7 to 12. Here we have Revelation 1 to 11 and then Revelation 12 to 22. First century AD in Revelation 1, first century AD in Revelation 12. That's how we know we've gone back in time. Tribulation is Revelation 6, obviously with the seals. Antichrist goes out to conquer, world war, and then the ripple effect of world war. You got the rapture right after, as expected, with the great multitude. This is why it's so ridiculous to say that the trumpets occur before the rapture or a part of the tribulation, since you have the rapture between the 6th and 7th seals, and there's only 7 seals, STV, seals, trumpets, vials, and the trumpets, the 7 angels are given the 7 trumpets, and they're preparing to sound them after the sun and moon go dark, after the great multitude appear in heaven, after the 7 seals. So how in the world can you put the trumpets, therefore, before the seals, before the sun and moon go dark? You can't. It's literally impossible. And so the last trumpet at the rapture, which is essentially signaling the end of that great tribulation, the end of the war. That was common in terms of the Old Testament and Jewish language when it came to war, when it came to battle. And so we have the last trump, which is not equated with the last trumpet judgment, the 7 trumpet judgment. It's totally different. The 7th trumpet judgment is thunderings and hail, but the last trump at the rapture is not part of God's wrath. It's just signaling the end of that great tribulation, the Antichrist war. Because guess what? He that endureth to the end of what? Those days, the great tribulation, the same shall be saved. Because those days are shortened for the elect's sake, or else no flesh would be saved. So if you're alive and you remain at the end of those days, those days of great tribulation, the Antichrist war, the mass persecution against believers, then what does the Bible say? Lift up your heads, your redemption draweth nigh. And at the sound of that trumpet, which is signaling the end of that war with the Antichrist, his war against the saints, that's signaling the end of the war. This is common to portray that or illustrate that with the sound of a trumpet. Okay. I mean, you see that in movies all the time. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with the Two Towers, but the battle for Helm's Deep at the end, the good guys, they're all losing. And just when they think they're going to lose for good, you got the you got the trumpet, and you've got Gandalf up there on a horse, dressed in white, with backup, with reinforcements, and that's what it's signaling. So the last trump is not the same as the 7th trumpet judgment, because the 7th trumpet judgment is not until after the tribulation, after the rapture, after your first 6 trumpets. So to take your 7th trumpet judgment over here and try and force fit it over here, no, it doesn't work. That's very sloppy. And so again, just as expected, you've got the tribulation in Revelation 13, rapture in Revelation 14, with the one like the Son of Man coming in a white cloud to reap the harvest of the earth. And then again, you've got God's wrath, a retelling of the story with different it's not all the same. It's not like these are all going to be perfectly parallel. It's the same story, more details, but it's still in chronological order. And I'm going to prove that right here. This is what the post-wrathers can't address. Notice this: 3.5 years tribulation. It's not even accurate to call the first 4 seals, the tribulation. It's basically the beginning of sorrows. But then you get great tribulation here at the 5th seal, where you get the martyrs appearing in heaven. That's the abomination of desolation. Then shall be great tribulation. Okay. Now, yes, there was great tribulation, one could say, in 70 AD, but that was local. It wasn't worldwide great tribulation because, again, we have shadows in 70 AD with the 7-year Jewish-Roman War, but then we have the literal, more dramatic fulfillment in the end times. That's what's so deep about Scripture, where Jesus Christ is answering two questions that the disciples ask. Okay, when are these things going to happen? Because Jesus just got done talking about the destruction of the second temple. Okay. But then they're also asking him another question: what is the sign of your coming and the end of the world? And so Jesus is juggling these different questions, but because the world works in cycles, there are prophetic cycles, there's partial fulfillment, shadow fulfillments, dual prophecy fulfillments, triple prophecy fulfillments. Jesus can answer these questions in Matthew 24 in a way where he's describing events leading up to the destruction of the temple, but then he's also describing events, 2,000 years or so into the future, with that final 7-year period, because there's so many parallels that he can explain it in the exact same way that he did in Matthew 24, and it makes sense. And so, yes, it was devastating in 70 AD, this war, but it wasn't devastating worldwide. But in the end times, this end time 7-year period, it will be devastating worldwide. It won't just be localized. That's why you can't say all of Matthew 24 was fulfilled in 70 AD, because it demonstrates you don't understand basic eschatology, because basic eschatology demands a proper and sophisticated understanding of partial fulfillments, shadow fulfillments, and then the literal, more dramatic fulfillment in the end times. It can't be missed. It's all throughout Scripture. We've already proven that with the abomination of desolation, just to name one, with Antiochus Epiphanes, Titus, future Antichrist, described in Revelation 13. So right here, the sixth seal, the rapture returns, sun and moon going dark, the second coming of Jesus. This is the rapture, right in between the sixth and seventh seal. That's why we see a great multitude that no man could number after these things in Revelation 7. Revelation 8, the trumpets begin. You can't take the trumpets here and put them before the sixth seal. This should not be difficult, guys. It's impossible. I'll debate any post. I actually have discovered that it's almost easier to refute the post-wrather than it is the pre-trib rapturists. Okay, so Revelation 6, verse 17, for the great day of his wrath is come. It's now here. Who shall be able to stand? That's why you don't find, notice this, guys. Go to Matthew 24. Read through Matthew 24. What do you see? The beginning of sorrows. For nation shall rise against nation. Wars and rumors of wars, false prophets, Antichrist. All of this lines up with Revelation 6. I did a whole 1.5-hour video on it, correlating Revelation 6 and the seals, and then also Matthew 24. And you know what that means? You can't say that your seals represent, let's say, the last 2,000 years of history, like the historicists do. Because Jesus says here, notice this, when he gets to the end, what does he say? He says, so likewise ye, when ye shall see these things. So whoever starts to see these things, right? The Antichrist going out to conquer, the wars and rumors of wars, which are going to be amplified in terms of the end time scenario, know that it is near. And we understand it's near, because if it's a 7-year period and then those days are cut short at the Great Tribulation, then yes, even at the doors, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass. This generation refers back to verse 33 when it says, ye shall see all of these things. The second person plural pronoun. That ye is referring back to Christians, disciples, followers. So Christians that begin to see these things come to pass, it's not going to be like, well, you got your first seal 1,500 years ago, and then your second seal is 500 years later, and then you got your abomination of desolation, another 400. No, it's all going to happen in one generation. Once that first seal is opened, guess what? From your first seal to the sun and moon going dark in the rapture, it's all happening in a short time. That's why the days are meant to be taken literal. 1260, 1290, 42 months, 3.5 years. Because once that seal, that first seal is opened, every time a seal is opened, more of the story is discernible to us. And so, no, it can't be extended over hundreds to thousands of years. We're refuting the historicist, because that generation is not going to pass. Just like in 70 AD, we have a shadow fulfillment here, because from 66 to 70 AD, that 7-year Jewish-Roman war, guess what? All of those things leading up to the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the city, and then the dispersal of the Jews all throughout, the earth, basically. Because the Christians at that time, they took heed of Jesus's warnings, and they fled. And, there was wrath upon the Jewish nation. These are all shadow fulfillments. All of that happened in a generation as well. That generation did not pass. Once those things began to come to fruition, that they all came to fruition in one generation. Just like the future, more literal fulfillment, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to have an end time 7-year period, and that generation won't pass until all of those things are fulfilled. So no, you can't stretch the seals out thousands of years. It just doesn't work. But anyways, leading up to verse 30, 29 to 30, immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened. This immediately after the tribulation of those days is referring back to what? The abomination of desolation. It's referring back to right here. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world unto this time. Because right here, verse 15, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Again, there's a partial fulfillment with Titus. He destroyed the temple. But where did he set up an image like Antiochus Epiphanes did, and like the one world leader in Revelation 13 did? He didn't. That's a partial fulfillment. But once this takes place in terms of the future, more dramatic fulfillment, the great tribulation begins. And that's why he says, and except those days, what days? The great tribulation. And that's why it says, once you get to verse 19, immediately after what? The tribulation of those days, referring back to great tribulation. And so it is appropriate to say that everything from the abomination of desolation to the rapture is the great tribulation. There has been great tribulation throughout history, but from the abomination of desolation to the sun and moon going dark in the rapture, that is the end times great tribulation. Shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. This is when Jesus Christ comes in the clouds. But I challenge any post-wrather to go through all of Matthew 24 leading up to his second coming and show me the trumpet judgments. Where is hail and fire being cast upon the earth? Where is a mountain being cast into the sea? Where do we see the 4 angels, the armies from Euphrates? Where do we see smoke and locusts coming out of the bottomless pit? Where do we see a burning star falling upon the rivers? You don't see it because the trumpets aren't described here. The trumpet judgments begin after the tribulation of those days. This ends with the second coming. This ends between the 6th and 7th seal. And so if you want to read about God's wrath, you want to know about God's wrath, what do you go to? You go to the book of Revelation. This refutes the trumpet judgments are not found in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, because they occur after the sun and moon go dark. This is proven by the chronology. My chronology, the 2-part chronology, could be falsified. Does anybody know what falsification means? If it did not fit. Refute the 2-part chronology, refute the chart. You can't, because it fits like a glove. So Revelation 6, this is where we see the sun and moon going dark, which correlates with Matthew 24. For the great day of his wrath is here. Now we have Revelation 7 because we're seeing the picture. We understand Matthew 24 because this is still chronological. This isn't a parenthetical where it's outside the chronology. No, Matthew 24, Jesus Christ came in the clouds to gather together his elect. Well, where do we go? We go to heaven. And notice Revelation 7, that's where we read about the great multitude appearing in heaven before the throne, coming out of great tribulation. And we understand that Jesus comes in the clouds after the tribulation of those days. You see how it fits perfectly? And notice in Revelation 7, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. If hail and fire was cast upon the earth, or if we had, the 7th trumpet judgment, thunderings and hail, and, 2nd trumpet, mountain cast into the sea, and all of these different things, you could not say, hurt not the earth, hurt not the sea, nor the trees, because they would have been hurt. The reason they're not hurt yet is because the seals, everything before the sixth seal, is not necessarily supernatural. They're man-made things, because you have Antichrist going out to conquer. So a shift in power of that magnitude typically results in a war. Lo and behold, second seal, we have a war, the world at war. And then the ripple effect of that war, famine, inflation, starvation, worldwide death. Eventually at the fifth seal, we have martyrs. And remember, all of these things, once you see these things begin to come to pass, this generation, that generation seeing it, Jesus is now in the story of the end times, because they're asking about his second coming. So in order for him to adequately answer that, he has to now shift his focus to a time after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And that's why he's still using the second person plural pronoun ye, referring to Christians, to believers. So whatever Christians there are at that time that are seeing these things begin to come to pass, Jesus is now in the story of that time. And so he's saying this generation now will not pass till all of these things be fulfilled. And so, no, you can't stretch them out thousands of years like the historicist wants to do. Notice this. So you go to Revelation 8. So we got Revelation 7, Revelation 8. Guys, please, post-wrather, pay attention. My last debate with a post-wrather, Jamie, he had to concede, actually. Yeah, this is a major problem. I'll have to look into it. And he hasn't been able to answer it because it's unanswerable. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about space of half an hour. So if he's opening the seventh seal, what's before the seventh seal? Seal 6, which is when the sun and moon go dark. Seal 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See how there's a chronology? The first 7 seals. But notice this. We're the great multitude's in heaven now. The rapture has already occurred between the 6th and 7th seal. So you can't now go to Revelation 11, 10 and say, well, the 7 trumpet judgment, that's the rapture. No, the rapture already occurred prior to that. It occurred between the 6th and 7th seals. And so notice this. And I saw the 7 angels. So now we have 7 angels. They stood before God, and to them were given. They're now given 7 trumpets. So we had the first 6 seals. 7th seal is open, which initiates the start of God's wrath. And now you have 7 angels. This is all in chronology, like a movie or your favorite series. Episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. Why in the world would you say that, something that happened in episode 8 actually happened in episode 3? I mean, there's a chronology there. And yes, you get flashback scenes and backstories and all these kinds of things within the chronology. Yeah, that's fine. But it's still overall a massive chronology. And so the 7th seal has been opened, and now you have 7 angels with 7 trumpets. So Revelation 8 is bringing the story into a new phase, and that new phase is after the phase that comprised the sun and moon going dark, the rapture, and the great multitude appearing in heaven. Notice this. And the 7 angels, which had the 7 trumpets, prepared. The reason why it says prepared is because guess what? They have not yet sounded the trumpets prior to this. So Revelation 7, the great multitude appear in heaven. Revelation 6, sun and moon go dark. Everything before that is what? Martyrs appearing in heaven, death in 1/4 of the earth, famine, starvation, go down the line. World war, Antichrist conquering. There's a chronology here. The trumpets are representative of God's wrath, because in Revelation 6, the great day of his wrath is come. Revelation 7, Revelation 8. This is now supernatural. Fire and hail being cast upon the earth is the wrath of God. Judgment by what? Judgment by fire. Judgment by water during God's wrath at the flood, the worldwide flood of Noah. And notice this, verse 7, the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. And they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burnt up. Revelation 7, the angels were saying, don't hurt the trees yet. Don't hurt the grass yet. Don't hurt the sea yet. Which means the trumpets haven't been sounded yet. And they're saying this after the rapture. And so we're in a new phase. Don't take something within this new phase and try and say it's the rapture. The rapture has already taken place. The first event that takes place when the first trumpet is sounded is hail and fire being cast upon the earth. Third part of the trees burnt up, and all of the grass burnt up. Post-wrath position dismantled. Notice this. So the fifth angel sounded. So now we're into the fifth trumpet judgment. But remember, before the rapture, you had the 144,000 sealed in heaven. Well, you have the rapture, 144,000 are sealed, Old Testament resurrected saints, but before God's wrath period. What's given to us is the 144,000 and then what? Great multitude. Okay. And so the great multitude, or the 144,000, they're sealed before God's wrath begins, the trumpets and vials. But notice down here, when it comes to the locusts, and there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. So one trumpet judgment alone, 5 months. 5 months. This is about 1,215 days when you do the wrath. And so we have the 144,000 that are healed here. And so the fifth trumpet judgment comes after the 144,000 are sealed. And the 144,000 are sealed between the sixth and seventh seals, which is after the tribulation, after the sun and moon are darkened, and after the rapture. The 144,000 are sealed after the tribulation and therefore do not exist within the tribulation and the seal. So no, to answer your question and to wrap this up in my comments on comments, Mr. Kurt, he tries to say that the trumpets are the tribulation. No, the trumpets and vials are both wrath. Trumpets come after the seals. Between the sixth and seventh seal, the sun and moon go dark, great multitude appear in heaven. We're no longer here. And so trumpets come after the seals, come after the rapture, and they begin God's wrath. And then you have trumpets and vials happening concurrently, simultaneously. That's why the vials are considered the 7 last plagues of God's wrath, because they are God's wrath. But Revelation 6:17, I believe it is, ends by saying, the great day of his wrath is come. It's now here. Trumpets come after that. That means trumpets comprise that phase of God's wrath. And so, Kurt, unfortunately, and again, I appreciate your feedback and comments and input, but you are most certainly wrong on this one. And so with that, guys, there's another End Times Moments that was far longer than a moment. So God bless you.